My name is Elaine Brooks. I'm 65 years old, a retired art teacher from Savannah, Georgia. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, I sold the house we built together and moved closer to my daughter Jasmine. I thought I was trading space for family, silence for warmth. But what I found instead was control manipulation, and a lesson I never expected to learn at this age: how to protect what's mine and how to paint my way back to freedom. It was Christmas Eve, the kind that used to mean music, cinnamon, and laughter. Now it meant performance. I parked my old Buick in front of my daughter's house, the kind with white columns and a perfectly trimmed hedge, and took a deep breath before stepping out. In the back seat sat my homemade pecan pie, the same recipe my late husband loved. I carried it like something fragile because it was. When Jasmine opened the door, her smile flickered. "Mom, you made it." I brushed a strand of gray hair behind my ear and smiled. I said I would. The scent of roasted turkey floated from the kitchen. Candles glowed on the dining table. And then from the living room, Victor's voice cut through the warmth. "Well, look who finally showed up." He leaned against the doorframe in his tailored red sweater, holding a glass of wine as if it were a prop in a show he was starring in. His grin was too wide, too deliberate. "Merry Christmas, Victor," I said evenly. "Merry Christmas," he replied, the words coated in sugar and salt. "Oh, by the way, my ex is joining us for Christmas dinner." The room fell silent. Even the soft crackle of the fireplace seemed to stop. Jasmine's hand froze on the napkin she was folding. "Victor," she said quietly. "You didn't mention that." He shrugged. "Didn't I?" "Well, she's in town for the holidays. It's only polite." Polite. That word tasted bitter. I placed my pie on the counter. "You're inviting your ex to a family dinner." Victor chuckled. "Relax, Elaine. We're all adults here. Besides, she and I are on great terms. She's even giving me advice on some business matters." I smiled tightly. "That sounds modern of you." He smirked. "You know, Elaine, that's the thing about the new generation. We don't hold grudges. We move forward. You should try it sometime." Jasmine tried to change the subject, talking about the decorations, about the neighborhood carolers. But Victor kept steering the conversation back to money status, his new investments. He poured himself another glass. "By the way, I checked your accounts for you last week, Elaine. You're all set for next month's payments. I made sure your utilities are on auto pay." The table grew quiet again. I could feel everyone's eyes shift toward me. I set down my fork gently. "You didn't need to do that." Victor laughed. "Oh, come on. You'd lose track of those things." "I'm just helping." Jasmine whispered, "Victor, please." But he continued louder this time. "It's cute, really, how she still writes checks. It's like watching a history documentary." Laughter bubbled from one of the guests, awkward and thin. I felt the familiar burn rise from my chest, the one I'd learned to swallow down for years. I smiled again, because silence was easier than confrontation in my daughter's home. Dinner began, plates passed around, glasses clinking. The turkey was golden, the cranberry sauce glossy, everything picture perfect. Yet every gesture felt rehearsed. Victor talked about his business ventures, about how smart people diversify their assets. Jasmine nodded her shoulders, slumping further each time he spoke. At one point, he leaned toward me. "You know, Elaine, you really should consider transferring your apartment to Jasmine. For tax reasons, of course. It's inefficient the way it's set up now." I felt my hand tremble slightly as I reached for the gravy boat. "I'll think about it," I said softly. He grinned. "Good. We can talk details next week." Jasmine's fork clinked against her plate. She didn't meet my eyes. The doorbell rang. Victor's face lit up like a stage light. Ah, there she is. The woman who stepped in wore a white coat and diamond earrings that caught every glint of the chandelier. Camille, he called her. She smiled, bright, confident, unapologetic. "Everyone," Victor announced, "this is Camille, my ex. Realtor of the Year twice running." I reached out a hand. "Welcome." She took at her perfume, sharp, expensive. "You must be Elaine," she said warmly. "Victor's told me so much about you." "Has he?" I replied, steady. "Then you already know I make a mean pecan pie." Camille laughed, taking the seat at the head of the table, my daughter's seat. Jasmine said nothing. As the conversation flowed, Victor became someone else, entirely animated, youthful, alive in a way I hadn't seen him with Jasmine. He leaned close to Camille as they reminisced about the old days, about traveling, ambition, freedom. Every sentence carried the same undertone comparison. "That's how a modern woman builds wealth," he said, nodding toward Camille, "independent, strategic." Then with a chuckle, "Elaine, you're old school." "That's charming in a way, but the world's changed." Something inside me shifted. The fire crackled louder than his laughter. Jasmine's hands fidgeted in her lap, her eyes glassy. I looked at my daughter, not the woman who used to paint beside me as a girl, but a stranger sitting quietly in her own home, too afraid to breathe wrong. Victor reached for another glass of wine. "Camille was just saying she could help us sell your place quickly if you ever decide to move, Elaine. Isn't that thoughtful?" Camille smiled. "Just trying to help the family." Family. I felt every syllable sink into me like ice water. I took my napkin, folded it slowly, and set it beside my plate. My reflection in the silverware looked older than I remembered. Victor's laughter filled the room again, echoing off the polished walls and glass ornaments. He didn't notice that Jasmine's shoulders were shaking or that Camille's smile faltered when she saw my expression. I laid down my fork, the metal clicking against porcelain like a gavel striking wood. "I see what this dinner is really about," I said quietly. Victor's grin froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" I met his eyes, calm but firm. "It means the turkey isn't the only thing being carved tonight." The silence that followed was heavier than the snow piling outside. I rose from the table, walked to the window, and watched the reflection of the family I used to believe in, the daughter I raised the man she married, the stranger sitting in her seat. The lights from the Christmas tree flickered against the glass like little fragments of truth waiting to break free. I didn't say another word, because some wars begin quietly with nothing more than a whisper and a fork laid down on a dinner plate. The night after that dinner, I didn't sleep. The laughter from the table still echoed in my head. Victor's smug tone, Camille's polished chuckle, Jasmine's uneasy silence, every sound replayed like a loop I couldn't turn off. When dawn finally touched the curtains, I sat by the window staring at the city still wrapped in frost. My reflection looked older, not from age, but from something deeper disappointment. It wasn't the first time I had felt small in my daughter's home, but it was the first time I saw clearly how far I'd let it go. 5 years earlier, I had sold the house Harold and I shared, the little blue one on Pine Street. After he passed, every creak of the floorboards sounded like his absence. I couldn't bear walking past the empty chair he used to read in. I thought moving closer to Jasmine would help fill that space. I used the money from the sale to buy a modest apartment near their neighborhood, 2 bedrooms, a small balcony morning light that poured across the living room like honey. I told myself it was enough, a simpler life, quiet, manageable, and close to family. At first it worked. Jasmine came by on Sundays with groceries. Victor offered to fix things, a leaky faucet, the router, the bills. I thought he was being kind, thought he wanted to help. I remember the first time he brought up my finances. We were sitting in my living room, the TV humming softly in the background. He had that tone, the kind that sounds like concern but hides control beneath it. "You really shouldn't stress about bills," he said. "It's not efficient for you to handle all this paperwork. I can help organize it. We can automate everything." He smiled like a salesman who'd already made the deal. "It's just easier," he added. Streamlining, I remember that word. It sounded harmless, then almost modern, responsible. So I agreed. We went to the bank together a week later. I sat beside him as he filled out forms faster than I could read them. "Just routine signatures," he said. "They need your authorization." I signed where he pointed. I didn't ask questions. That's how control slips away, not in one moment, but in small, polite exchanges that seem practical. Months passed. My bills stopped arriving in the mail. He said it was because he'd moved everything online for security. My bank statements came less often. When I mentioned it, he laughed. "You're fine, Elaine. You don't need to worry about that stuff anymore." The way he said that stuff, it made me feel like a child, clumsy and naive. Jasmine, meanwhile, was always in the middle. "He's just trying to help Mom," she'd say. "You know how tech-savvy he is." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe both of them. But sometimes when I tried to make a purchase or check my account, things didn't line up. Transfers I didn't remember authorizing. Payments labeled joint expenses. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, that it would all sort itself out. It never did. The apartment became both my sanctuary and my cell. I filled it with things that reminded me of Harold, his old armchair, his tools neatly arranged on a shelf, the black and white photo from our wedding day. The walls held me together when people didn't. Yet even there, Victor's presence crept in. He'd stop by unannounced, opening my refrigerator like it was his own. He'd suggest selling small things, clutter he called them, to make the space feel lighter. Once he even rearranged my bookshelf, moving Harold's books into boxes without asking. It's just stuff he said when I protested. But it wasn't. It was my history. My proof that I had lived a full life before his version of efficiency arrived. I tried to reclaim small pieces of independence, paying bills in cash, writing things down on paper instead of using his apps. But every time I did, he'd correct me with that same patient, patronizing smile. "You're overcomplicating it again, Elaine." Some nights I'd lie in bed listening to the hum of the heater, wondering how I'd gone from managing an entire household for decades to being managed myself. I missed Harold's voice, the calm way he'd say, "You've always known how to take care of yourself." I needed to hear that again. But he was gone. All that was left was this apartment, my last piece of control, my last proof of independence. I started keeping a small notebook. Nothing fancy, just lined pages dated neatly, each entry noting where my money went, who had access to what and what Victor said each time we talked about adjustments. Writing it down made me feel less invisible. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, I'd paint. I had one canvas always sitting by the balcony door, a sunrise I never finished. Each time I tried, the light looked wrong, the horizon too uncertain. Maybe that's how my life felt too, halfway between darkness and day. That December night, after the disastrous dinner, I sat staring at that unfinished painting for hours. The gold and blue blended unevenly under the lamp's glow. I thought about every moment I had handed over control, every time I'd said yes, when my heart screamed no. Sometime past midnight, I got up to make tea. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the vent near the hallway ceiling. Then I heard it. A sound faint distant coming from above. Victor's voice. He and Jasmine lived one floor up. I froze, holding my breath. His tone was light casual, but the words sliced through the quiet. "She's easy," he said, laughter spilling into the air. "You just talk to her like she's fragile. She signs anything if you call it paperwork. It's almost too easy to keep her under control." Camille's laugh followed, unmistakable. "You're terrible, Victor." "Terrible," he repeated, still laughing. "Or smart." The teacup trembled in my hand. I stood there for a long time, the sound of their voices bleeding through the vent like poison. Each word confirmed what I already feared, that my trust had become their game. When the voices finally faded, I sat at the table staring at my notebook. My pulse was loud in my ears. I opened to a blank page and wrote a single line: "He thinks I'm easy to control." Then below it, "He's wrong." Outside, the city was silent. But inside me, something had begun to wake, something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anger, something stronger, resolve. At first I thought I imagined it. The sound was faint, a hum of voices slipping through the vent, like whispers from another life. But when I leaned closer, the laughter was unmistakable. Victor's laughter. The air conditioner rattled slightly as I held my breath. My heart thudded so loudly I feared it would give me away. I moved my chair quietly beneath the hallway vent and stood on it, careful not to creak the wood. The voice became clearer, sharper, like static tuning into sin. "She'll sign it soon," Victor said. "I told her it's just for tax purposes. Once the transfer's done, we can sell it and reinvest everything. Clean, simple, no drama." My grip on the chair tightened. Another voice, female, smooth teasing, answered, "You mean your mother-in-law's apartment. The one she bought after her husband died. That's the one," he said, chuckling. "It's not like she needs all that space. She barely uses half of it. Once the papers are in Jasmine's name, we'll put it on the market and roll it into the new project." There was a pause, then that woman, Camille, laughed. "So your mother-in-law's savings will fund our new condo." Victor laughed too. "Well, technically it'll be Jasmine's name on it. What she doesn't know won't hurt her." My chest tightened so hard I thought I might fall. I climbed down, slow and silent, and sat at the edge of the couch. My hands were trembling, but my mind was crystal clear. It wasn't just control. It wasn't just humiliation. It was theft. Everything Harold and I had built, decades of work, sacrifices, little joys, was about to be siphoned into someone else's luxury. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at nothing, feeling the world tilt slightly off its axis. Then, without thinking, I reached for my phone on the coffee table. I opened the voice recorder, pressed record, and held it close to the vent. Their voices continued muffled but distinct. "She's old-fashioned," Victor said. "She thinks signatures mean trust. You just have to sound confident. People like her are terrified of conflict." Camille hummed. "And after you sell it, I'll tell her it's an investment for Jasmine's future. She'll believe me. She always does." The sound of their laughter filled the air again. Cruel, carefree, practiced. I pressed stop and lowered the phone into my lap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The apartment that had once felt too small suddenly felt cavernous. The air was cold, heavy with betrayal. The only sound was the quiet hum of the heater, mechanical, steady, indifferent. I replayed the recording. Once, twice. Every word etched itself into my memory like a scar. There was no misunderstanding now. No, maybe he didn't mean it. He had meant every word. The manipulation wasn't an accident. It was a plan. I set the phone down gently, afraid to shatter the stillness. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, older, yes, but harder, more defined. I remembered the day Harold and I bought our first home. We signed those papers with trembling hands and wide smiles, promising each other we'd never let anyone take what we'd built. He'd called it our beginning, and now Victor wanted to call it a transaction. I walked to the living room wall where my unfinished painting hung the half-finished sunrise I could never seem to complete. The colors had dried unevenly over time, fading from gold into gray. For years, that canvas had represented something I couldn't name, grief, maybe, or waiting. But now, under the pale light of the lamp, it looked like something else entirely. A challenge. My eyes burned, but not from tears, from clarity. I picked up a brush, dipped it in dark blue, and added a single stroke across the horizon, sharp, deliberate, alive. The color sliced through the old paint like defiance made visible. When Harold died, people told me to keep my heart open, to be kind, to accept help. But no one warned me that kindness can make you a target, and trust can be the easiest door for cruelty to walk through. I walked back to the table, opened my notebook, and wrote the time and date at the top of a new page. Then I listed what I had heard, every phrase, every lie, every number. My handwriting was shaky at first, but it steadied with each word. There's something powerful about writing down the truth. It turns chaos into evidence. I stared at the phone again, my pulse steady now. The recording sat safely saved in the file folder. Proof. I whispered to the empty room, "You think you've won." My voice sounded different, lower, firmer. "You think you've built a cage around me." I turned toward the painting, the gold edge catching the lamplight. Not anymore. The city outside was quiet, the kind of deep night silence that belongs to people who are certain they're safe. But inside my apartment, a storm was gathering, silent, patient, unstoppable. For years, I'd mistaken survival for submission. I told myself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping control. But peace without dignity is just another form of captivity. Victor thought he was clever, manipulating, charming, calculating. But he had underestimated the one thing men like him never understand about women like me. We take notes. We remember everything. I looked back at the painting, the horizon streaked with that defiant stroke of blue, and felt something steady rise in my chest. They had stolen my trust, my comfort, my place in their family, but they would not steal what came next. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the wall just beneath the painting and whispered, "You won't steal my dawn." The morning after the recording, the sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the city like a secret that couldn't stay hidden. I hadn't slept much. My mind ran in quiet, relentless circles. Every word Victor had said, every laugh from Camille, every signature I'd once given without reading. By the time the first streaks of light touched the blinds, I'd already made my decision. I dressed carefully, gray coat, dark gloves, the scarf Harold had bought me on our 25th anniversary. The wool had thinned over the years, but it still smelled faintly of cedar, strength, memory, and something older than fear. I slipped the small recorder into my purse and caught the bus downtown. The streets were still half asleep, shopkeepers lifting shutters, the smell of rain clinging to the pavement. I hadn't visited Mr. Henderson's office in years, not since Harold passed. He'd been our family lawyer for 3 decades, the kind of man who still sent Christmas cards written in ink. When I walked into the building, the receptionist looked up, startled, then smiled. "Mrs. Brooks, it's been a long time." "Yes," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Too long." Mr. Henderson was waiting in his corner office, papers, neatly stacked books lining the walls in the same order I remembered. He was older now, a little slower in his movements, but his eyes were still sharp, the kind that could see through pretense. "Elaine," he said warmly, rising to greet me. "I didn't expect to see you today." "How have you been holding up better now that I'm here?" I replied. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit down. Tell me what's brought you in." I hesitated only for a moment before setting my purse on the table. I need to confirm something I said about my apartment. He nodded, opened a file drawer, and began flipping through folders. "The condo on Maple Street, correct? Yes. I just need to know it's still in my name." He glanced up at me, brows narrowing slightly. "Of course it is, unless you've signed something recently." I didn't answer. He read my silence, exhaled, and leaned back. "You haven't, have you?" "No," I said quietly, "but someone has been trying to make sure I do." I told him everything. Not the emotions, not the betrayal, just the facts. The conversation through the vent, the way Victor handled my finances, the sudden talk of tax transfers. Mr. Henderson's expression hardened as I spoke. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Elaine, I wish I could say I'm surprised, but you're not the first widow to walk into my office with this kind of story." I stared at the brass clock ticking on his shelf. "Is there anything I can do?" He nodded slowly. "There's always something, but we need to act quietly. For now, the title is still in your name. However," he paused, "I did receive a request last week. Your son-in-law asked for a copy of your will." The words hit like a stone dropped in water, silent at first, then rippling outward. "He what?" Mr. Henderson sighed. "He said it was for estate planning." Of course I refused, but it tells us where his intentions are heading. I felt the color drain from my face. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was confirmation. For years, I had trusted him to manage to streamline, as he called it. But what he really streamlined was access. And what he wanted next wasn't my paperwork. It was my life turned into inheritance. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "finally, I want to make sure that never happens." He gave a short nod. "We can secure your property quietly, but we'll need to set things in motion immediately." The words steadied me. "Then let's begin." He opened a fresh folder, scribbled a few notes, and printed out a single-page form. "This authorizes preliminary preparation for a private transfer strictly under your control. No one else will know until it's done." I took the pen from him. My hand trembled slightly, but not from fear, from release. Signing my name didn't feel like surrender this time. It felt like reclamation. When the pen lifted from the paper, I looked up and met his gaze. "This is just the first step," he said gently. "I know," I replied, "but it's the one that matters." We talked for another half-hour discussing logistics timelines, what to expect. I listened carefully, writing everything down. Every detail mattered now. I wouldn't let anyone else handle my life again. When I left the office, the wind outside had picked up scattering golden leaves across the sidewalk. The sky had opened just enough for sunlight to break through, pale cold but insistent. I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in. For the first time in years, I felt my own agency returning. I stopped at a cafe across the street and ordered tea. The waitress smiled when she handed me the cup. "Rough morning," she asked kindly. I smiled back. "No," I said. "A necessary one." As I stirred the tea, I realized something unexpected. I didn't just want to protect what I had. I wanted to rebuild who I was. That afternoon, I walked past the community center near my apartment and noticed a small sign on the bulletin board, "Adult Art Classes, Beginners Welcome." Something in me stirred. When I entered the office to ask about enrollment, the young woman behind the desk looked up brightly. "Would you like to sign up, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to start next week." She smiled. "Wonderful. It's a small group. Therapeutic, really." I nodded, pretending that was my reason. I just need something new to focus on. But the truth was simpler. I needed distance, a place to disappear quietly while I built my next move. Back home, I placed Mr. Henderson's folder in the locked drawer of my desk and tucked the key into my pocket. I felt a calm I hadn't known in months, not peace exactly, but purpose. That night, I took out my painting again. The sunrise was still unfinished. I dipped the brush in pale yellow this time, adding light, where before there had only been hesitation. When I stepped back, I realized the colors were changing. So was I. I cleaned the brush, turned off the lamp, and sat by the window. The city below glimmered softly, unaware of the quiet rebellion unfolding above it. In the corner of my desk, the signed form lay waiting, a simple piece of paper, yet everything had shifted because of it. I traced my name with one finger and whispered, "Harold, I'm taking care of it." Then I slipped the document into its folder and locked the drawer again. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped against the glass light, steady cleansing. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a quiet storm, deliberate, contained, and unstoppable. I met with Mr. Henderson twice more. His office always smelled faintly of leather and dust, the scent of order and old secrets. Together, we set up a trust, a simple name, Maple Sun Holdings, anonymous, efficient, invisible. The apartment would be listed under it, not mine. He looked up from the paperwork as I signed. "Once the funds arrive, we'll secure them in a new account under your name only. No secondary access, no visibility, not even family," I asked. He smiled faintly. "Especially not family." When I walked out that day, the sky was bright but cold. The kind of winter sun that doesn't warm you, just watches. I pulled my scarf tighter, feeling the weight of both fear and relief pressing against my ribs. I had spent years believing silence was submission. Now I understood silence can also be a weapon. That week, I went to my art class as usual. Eleanor greeted me with her familiar warmth, and Ruth waved from across the room. The smell of acrylic paint, coffee, and faint dust felt grounding. "How's the sunrise coming along?" Eleanor asked, glancing at my canvas. "Almost there," I said. "It just needs the right light." "Don't we all?" she replied with a smile. While others painted flowers or winter landscapes, I stayed focused on my horizon, golden blue, defiant. It was strange how art mirrored life without asking permission. Every stroke felt like a choice: stay or move, hide or rise. During our third session, a man stopped by the classroom door, gray-haired, dressed neatly in a wool coat. Eleanor introduced him as Mr. Benton, the owner of a small gallery downtown. He'd come to check on potential pieces for a spring exhibition. He wandered between easels, nodding politely until he stopped behind mine. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then softly, "That's not a sunrise. That's a story trying to forgive itself." I looked up, startled. "You can tell that from paint." He smiled. "You can tell everything from color. May I see it when it's finished?" His words settled into me like warmth after a long chill. "Yes," I said. "You can." That night, I returned home and stood in front of the painting for hours. For the first time, I believed it might belong somewhere other than my living room wall. Meanwhile, the apartment listing went live quietly, privately buried beneath layers of confidentiality clauses. I told no one, not Jasmine, not Victor, not even Ruth. The first offer arrived within 6 days. A retired couple from Vermont, gentle voices over the phone, loved the balcony and the morning light. They didn't haggle. They simply said, "We can feel the peace in this place." Peace, yes. That was the word I had been waiting for. Within 2 weeks, everything was finalized. Henderson handled the escrow, the transfers, the documents. My role was simple: read, sign, breathe. When I saw the confirmation email that the funds had been wired to the new trust account, I sat back and closed my eyes. There was no joy, no triumph, just stillness. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and whispered, "Harold, it's done." The next morning, I started packing. Box by box, I labeled everything with the precision of someone closing a chapter: kitchen essentials, bedroom linens, studio supplies. I kept my movements calm, deliberate, unhurried. I found Harold's old watch tucked in a drawer, the one he used to wear when timing roasts on Sundays. I wound it gently and listened to it tick. It still worked. Time, it seemed, had been waiting for me to catch up. By the end of the week, the apartment stood mostly empty. Only the framed painting remained on the wall, the sunrise finally complete. It gleamed in soft golds and deep violets, the colors of both endings and beginnings. I thought about taking it down, but something in me knew it should stay. The new owners deserved that piece of light. On Christmas Eve, I cleaned the apartment one last time. Every corner, every shelf, every trace of me scrubbed and smoothed. Then I sat on the floor with a cup of chamomile tea, surrounded by boxes, and listened to the city hum outside. The irony wasn't lost on me. Christmas, the season of family, and there I was alone. Yet it didn't feel lonely. It felt intentional. Silence had become my language now. Before leaving, I walked through each room once more. The kitchen where I'd baked pies for Jasmine as a child, the living room where Victor had lectured me about efficiency, the balcony where Harold and I had once danced under the stars before illness took his breath away. I touched the door frame gently. "Thank you," I whispered, "for teaching me what I can survive." When I stepped into the hallway, my heart was steady. The suitcase wheels rolled softly across the tiles. Then just as I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed. The screen flashed Victor. I stared at it for a long second before answering. His voice came sharp, breathless, already furious. "Elaine, where's the apartment paperwork?" I said nothing. "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "Mr. Henderson's office won't return my calls. The title records are missing, and I just heard the place was listed." "What the hell did you do?" I let the silence stretch until I could hear him breathing hard through the speaker. When I finally spoke, my tone was calm. Too calm. "You should really be careful about what you assume, Victor. Sometimes the paperwork speaks louder than people do." He cursed under his breath. "You think you can outsmart me? You don't know who you're dealing with." I almost smiled. "Oh, I do." Before he could say another word, I ended the call. The elevator door slid open. I stepped inside, pressing the ground floor button with a steady hand. As the doors closed, the faint reflection of my face appeared in the metal calm, composed, untouchable. The building hummed softly as it descended. My suitcase rested beside me, and on my phone screen, Victor's name flashed again. I let it ring. Outside, snow had begun to fall, light, quiet, deliberate. I walked through it without looking back, each step marking the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. They didn't call first. Of course they didn't. It was the last Sunday of December when the pounding began, sharp, relentless, shaking the door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Victor's voice carried through the hallway. Elaine opened the door right now behind him. Jasmine's voice trembling but firm. "Mom, please, we just need to talk." I took a breath, unlocked the door, and stepped aside. "Come in." The storm entered my living room. Victor first, his face flushed with anger, Jasmine behind him pale and shaking. I'd imagined this moment a dozen times, the confrontation, the shouting, the accusations. What I hadn't expected was how calm I'd feel. Victor didn't even look around the apartment. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded. I called Henderson's office. He said the property title's already been transferred. "You sold the apartment without telling us." "Without telling you," I corrected softly. Jasmine blinked at me, her voice breaking. "Mom, please tell me this isn't true." "It's true," I said. "The apartment was mine. I decided what to do with it." Victor laughed a dry, incredulous sound. "Yours? We've been helping you manage it for years. That place was part of our future, Elaine. Jasmine's future. You had no right to make decisions behind our backs." I studied him for a moment, every muscle in his face twitching with fury. "No right?" I repeated quietly. "You seem to forget whose name was on those papers." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You don't know what you've done. There are taxes, accounts, investments tied to that property. You've made a mess of everything." I turned toward the kitchen table. My phone rested there, screen dark, silent, the same device that had captured his voice through the vent weeks ago. I picked it up, unlocked it, and slid it across the table toward him. "What's this?" he snapped. "Play it," I said. He hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Go on," I repeated. "It's your favorite topic, control." Jasmine looked between us, confused. "What's going on?" I met her eyes. "You'll understand in a moment." Victor pressed play. The recording filled the room, the faint static, then his unmistakable voice, smooth, confident, arrogant. "She'll sign it soon. I told her it's just for tax purposes. Once the transfer's done, we can sell it and reinvest everything. Clean, simple, no drama." Then Camille's laugh, bright, cruel. "So your mother-in-law's savings will fund our new condo." Victor's voice again laughing. "Exactly. She's old-fashioned. You just have to sound confident. People like her are terrified of conflict." The air in the room shifted. Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth. Victor froze, eyes darting toward me. "That's out of context," he said quickly. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," I said. Jasmine's voice trembled. "You told me it was for taxes, that it would save her money." Victor's tone sharpened. "Don't start this again, Jasmine. You're taking her side without even thinking I'm listening," she said, her voice rising for the first time. "And I think I've heard enough." He turned on me, then pointing a shaking finger. "You recorded me in my own home." "That's illegal." "It's not," I said evenly. "Not when it's evidence of coercion." His jaw clenched. "You think you're clever?" "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm finally awake." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed distant. Jasmine sank into the couch, her face drained of color. "You lied to me," she whispered to him. Victor ran a hand through his hair. "I did it for us. Don't you see that your mother doesn't need all that money? She's retired, she's comfortable. We could have built something together." I folded my hands. "You mean you could have built something with my foundation?" His face reddened. "You betrayed the family, Elaine." "Betrayed?" I repeated slowly, feeling each syllable. "No, Victor. I protected it. You were the one tearing it apart." He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the apartment. "You don't get it. You can't just walk away from something we've planned for years." I leaned forward slightly. My voice stayed calm, almost soft. "Watch me." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe for years I'd played the role of the accommodating mother-in-law, the gentle widow who let everyone decide for her. That woman was gone now. The sale was legal, I said. Every cent was transferred into an account you'll never touch. Henderson handled the paperwork himself. It's protected under trust law. You can't reverse it, you can't claim it, and you can't intimidate me into changing it. Jasmine looked up, tears glistening. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said softly. "You were too busy believing him." Victor's jaw tightened. You think this ends with money? You think that's all I wanted? No. I said, I think you wanted control, but that's over. He opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. Anger had nowhere left to go. I stood gathering the folder from the counter, the last of my documents. You should leave now. Jasmine hesitated, glancing between us. Mom, please. It's all right, Jasmine, I said gently. You don't have to choose today. Just know the truth is no longer negotiable. Victor took a step back, his breathing heavy, his pride cracking at the edges. You'll regret this, he hissed. I looked him straight in the eye. No, Victor. I just ended your investment. He froze, the color draining from his face. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he turned sharply and stormed toward the door. Jasmine lingered for a moment longer, eyes filled with something between guilt and realization, before following him out. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. I exhaled slow and steady. My pulse steadied too. The recording was still playing faintly in the background, his laughter looping one last time before fading into quiet. I picked up the phone, deleted the file, and whispered, Justice served. The sunlight through the window had shifted, painting a streak of gold across the floor. The unfinished cup of tea on the table had gone cold, but I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. The silence after the storm didn't last long. 2 days later, the phone calls began. Not from Victor, but from unfamiliar numbers, investigators, auditors, and eventually one curt voice from the Department of Revenue. They were polite, professional, detached, but every question they asked revealed more of what Victor had built and how quickly it was falling apart. By the end of the week, his business accounts were frozen, contracts dissolved, partners disappeared. Apparently, the very same creative accounting methods he'd used to control me had drawn government attention months earlier. Selling my apartment had pulled the last thread that kept his fabric of lies intact. It unraveled beautifully. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, listening to the quiet hum of justice at work. The following Saturday, Jasmine showed up at my door. No makeup, eyes swollen, her hair unbrushed, her voice small. Mom, she whispered. Can I stay for a while? I nodded without asking questions. The guest rooms made up. She didn't bring much, just a duffel bag and a silence that hung between us like smoke. She didn't talk about Victor, and I didn't ask. We existed in parallel for the first few days, 2 women in the same house, circling each other gently, afraid to touch the wound. But the truth doesn't stay quiet forever. On the 4th evening, I found her sitting on the couch, holding a letter. The paper trembled in her hands. It's from the bank, she said softly. They found loans under your name. Victor signed them digitally last year. I had no idea. I sat down beside her, my body still but my pulse loud. How many? 3, totaling nearly 40,000. I closed my eyes. And they're investigating. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. They said the signatures were traced to his account. The audit exposed everything. His company, the loans, even the fake tax deductions. The words blurred into the air. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to rage, to ask how she could live beside him and never see the rot beneath the surface. But another part, the part that had already lost enough, stayed still. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't want to believe it. I kept thinking he was protecting us, helping us. I looked at her, really looked. My daughter, 40 years old, still searching for safety in the wrong places. I had been that woman once too. Jasmine, I said quietly, sometimes love looks like help. Sometimes it looks like harm. The hard part is knowing which is which. She broke then, sobbing into her hands. I reached out, pulling her close. For years, we'd lived as if affection was conditional, offered through favors, withheld through silence. But in that moment, I didn't think about who was right. I thought about who was left. She stayed for weeks. Slowly, the house filled with the sounds of healing the kettle, whistling in the morning, her soft footsteps down the hallway, the faint scratch of my paintbrush across the canvas. We didn't talk about the past much. We just coexisted. The audit made headlines in the local business section. Entrepreneur investigated for fraudulent claims, his photo confident smiling fake, printed beside words like embezzlement and loan misuse. I didn't clip the article. I didn't need to. Some evenings I caught Jasmine staring out the window, lost in thought. I recognized that look, the one people wear when they realize their world wasn't built on truth, but on permission. She started helping around the house, cooking, folding laundry, sorting through old boxes. One night, while she was tidying the bookshelf, she found my old notebooks, the ledgers, the records, the documentation of every conversation and transaction. "Mom," she said softly, flipping through the pages, "you wrote it all down." "I had to," I replied. "Paper remembers even when people forget." She smiled faintly through her tears. "You really saved yourself." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped letting someone else spend my life for me." For the first time in years, we ate dinner together without tension. I made Harold's old stew recipe. Jasmine said it tasted like home. I said it tasted like peace. But peace can be fragile, especially when it follows betrayal. Late one night, I woke to the sound of quiet crying. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't from a dream. I stepped into the hallway, the soft glow from the living room spilling under the door. Jasmine sat on the couch, her head buried in her hands. I walked over, sat beside her, and waited. She finally spoke between shallow breaths. "I keep seeing his face," she said. "The lies, the way he made me defend him even against you." I stayed silent. She turned to me, eyes swollen, voice shaking. "Mom, I was so afraid you'd leave me like Dad did." Her words cut clean through the night. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The memory of Harold's last hospital bed flashed through my mind. Jasmine standing at the doorway, too young to understand what goodbye meant. "I never left you," I said softly. "I just stepped back so you could grow." She looked at me, tears shimmering. I thought distance meant abandonment. "It didn't," I said. "It meant love that refused to enable." The clock ticked softly behind us. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying winter's last chill. For years, we had built walls made of misunderstanding. That night, they began to crack. Jasmine leaned against my shoulder, her body trembling. I held her hand, feeling how small it still was in mine. "Mom," she whispered, "what happens now?" I thought of the empty apartment, the trust account, the finished painting still resting against my easel, a horizon reborn. "We start over," I said. "But this time we build something that can't be taken." The words settled between us, quiet but certain. Outside, the wind calmed. The night grew softer. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed morning would come. Not because it always does, but because we'd earned it. The ocean was the first sound that greeted me every morning. Not traffic, not voices, not the clicking of Victor's shoes, pacing through my thoughts, just the tide breathing in and out steady, certain eternal. I had moved to a small coastal town 2 months after everything ended. The name of the place was Bayshore. Population barely 2,000. It smelled of salt and rain and paint, thinner, a strange but comforting blend that followed me everywhere. My apartment here was simple, 1 bedroom, 1 wide window overlooking the pier. The walls were bare at first, but slowly they began to fill with color. My canvases leaned against them like patient friends. Each morning I walked to the community center where I now taught painting to seniors. The sign outside read, "Silver Horizons Creative Workshop." The first time I unlocked that door, I felt the same thrill I used to feel at the start of a new semester back when I taught art at the high school. Except this time, I wasn't instructing. I was guiding. My students came from all walks of life, retired nurses, former mechanics, widowers, rediscovering joy. We painted seashell sunsets, and sometimes just colors that refused to name themselves. There was laughter, a little mess, and a lot of life. One of the men, Harold, no relation to my late husband, always joked that my calm voice made everyone paint straighter lines. I told him art wasn't about straightness, it was about honesty. Some days after class ended, I stayed behind to clean the brushes and talk to Eleanor, who ran the gallery downtown. She had kept her promise from months ago to display my finished painting once it was ready. We named it Reclaimed Light. The first time I saw it hanging under the soft yellow spotlight in her gallery, I almost cried. It was the same sunrise I had started in the darkest chapter of my life, now complete a symphony of gold and blue, the horizon stretching wide and forgiving. Visitors often asked what the painting meant. I always said it's about returning to yourself. Life in Bayshore was quieter, slower, more deliberate. I learned the rhythm of tides, the patience of small talk, the peace of solitude that wasn't loneliness. Some afternoons I sat on the beach with a sketchbook tracing waves with charcoal. The sea had its own palette, pewter gray in the morning, turquoise by noon, and violet at dusk. Watching it reminded me that nothing stays one color forever. One breezy Tuesday, my phone rang while I was arranging paints for class. The caller ID read, Mr. Henderson. Elaine, his familiar baritone, greeted me. Good news. The court officially cleared you of all financial liability related to Victor's case. Every fraudulent document was traced back to him. You're free. The word hung in the air. Free. I sat down slowly, letting it sink in. Thank you, I said softly. Truly. You earned it, he replied. Justice takes time, but it always arrives. When I hung up, I realized I'd been holding my breath. I let it out in a long, shaking sigh, then laughed a quiet, genuine laugh that startled me. I walked outside down to the edge of the pier. The sky stretched clear and pale, the kind of blue that promised renewal. Seagulls dipped low over the water, and somewhere nearby a child was blowing bubbles that caught the light before vanishing. I thought about everything that had led me here, the betrayal, the recording, the long nights of doubt. I thought about Harold, my husband, and the life we'd built that taught me strength before loss, taught me silence. And I thought about Jasmine. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. The last I knew, she had started a part-time job at a local library, rebuilding her own independence one paycheck at a time. I respected her space. Healing doesn't happen under supervision. Back in the studio that evening, I painted another sunrise, this one softer with gentle lavender streaks melting into gold. A few of my students stayed late chatting about the weather, the upcoming art fair, the little things that make life manageable again. One of them, Ruth, said, "You always paint mornings, Elaine. Never nights." I smiled, because I already lived through mine. The class ended, the chairs stacked, the brushes rinsed. I turned off the lights and stood by the window for a moment. The ocean shimmered beneath the moonlight. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass, older, yes, but also lighter somehow. When I got home, the phone buzzed again. The screen lit up Jasmine. For a moment, my heart skipped. I hadn't expected it, not tonight, not so soon. I answered, my voice steady. Hello. There was a pause on the line, the kind filled with things unsaid. Then her voice soft and uncertain. Mom, can I visit your class? I closed my eyes and smiled, feeling the warmth spread through me. Yes, I said. I'd like that very much. The call ended, but the sound of her voice lingered like music after the last note. Outside, the waves whispered against the shore, a steady, patient rhythm, as if the world itself were exhaling with me. In that moment, I realized something simple, yet profound. You don't always rebuild your life by starting over. Sometimes you rebuild it by finally coming home to yourself. The morning Jasmine arrived, the tide was low, the air soft with mist. I had been setting up canvases in the studio when I saw her through the front window, standing by the door. Her posture uncertain, as if she were deciding whether to knock or turn back. When she finally stepped inside, I noticed the change before she spoke. The expensive jewelry was gone. Her clothes were simple. Her eyes, once full of restless energy, looked quieter, as if exhaustion had washed away whatever pride used to live there. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice small. "Hi, sweetheart." I didn't rush to hug her. We just stood there for a moment, measuring the space between us. Then I gestured toward the easels. "You came on a good day. We're painting sunlight." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Of course we are." The class had already started. Ruth and Harold were chatting over brushes, their laughter filling the room. When I introduced Jasmine, they greeted her warmly. She smiled back, but her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. I gave her a clean canvas and a set of paints. She looked at the blank surface for a long time before picking up the brush. Her first stroke was hesitant, trembling like a voice unused to honesty. I walked around the room helping my students blend their yellows and whites, but my eyes kept drifting back to Jasmine. She was painting a horizon, though the colors looked heavy, the sky more gray than blue. When the class ended, the others lingered for tea, but Jasmine stayed behind. The room smelled faintly of turpentine and chamomile, a scent I had come to associate with peace. "Your students seem nice," she said softly. "They're kind," I replied. "Kindness grows in places where competition doesn't." She nodded, tracing her finger along the edge of her palette. I forgot what that felt like. We stood in silence for a while, just the sound of brushes clinking in the water jar. Then, without looking at me, she said I filed for divorce. I stopped rinsing the brushes. When last week she said, "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure." I kept thinking maybe he'd change, maybe I'd wake up and it would all make sense. But it didn't. It never will. Her voice didn't shake. It was steady, like a confession rehearsed too many times in her head before she could speak it aloud. "I started therapy too," she added. "For the first time in my life, I'm not talking about fixing someone else, just trying to understand me." I set the brush down and looked at her. "That's brave." She gave a small, tired laugh. "It doesn't feel brave. It feels like learning to walk again. Sometimes that's exactly what courage is," I said. She looked around the studio, the rows of canvases, the streaks of light reflecting off the floor. "It's beautiful here, Mom. Peaceful." "I needed peace," I said quietly. For a long time, I thought peace came from keeping everyone else comfortable. Turns out, it only comes when you stop letting people rearrange your boundaries. She nodded slowly. "I understand that now." I could tell she wanted to say more, but words seemed to weigh too much. So instead, we painted. Side by side, mother and daughter, both quiet. Our brushes moved differently hers, cautious mind, deliberate, but the rhythm was the same. Every so often she'd glance at my canvas and mimic a color blend or a curve. I didn't correct her. I just let her find her way. At one point, she sighed. "Do you think people can change?" I thought about Victor, about the recordings, about years of manipulation dressed as charm. Then I thought about Jasmine standing here trying to start again. "Yes," I said, "but not everyone wants to. Change isn't a gift. It's a decision." She looked down at her painting. "Then I'm trying to decide every day." That afternoon, we broke for tea. She insisted on helping me clean up, just like when she was a child, rinsing the cups, drying the brushes, humming under her breath. There was something achingly familiar about it, like a memory returning home after too many years away. Before she left, she walked around the room studying the paintings hanging on the wall. Her eyes landed on my reclaimed light. She stared at it for a long time, her shoulders straightening, her breathing slowing. The golden rays stretched across the canvas, illuminating her reflection faintly in the glass. "I never realized how much color could hold pain," she said quietly. "It holds everything," I replied. "Pain, forgiveness, even silence." She turned to me. "I think I want to learn that. Learn what I asked." Her eyes met mine, soft but certain. How to draw the sun again. The room went still. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and paint through the open window. For the first time in years, I saw something bright flicker in her, not denial, not guilt, but hope. I didn't say anything. I just reached over and placed a clean brush in her hand. "Then we'll start next week." She smiled, the kind that didn't need words to complete it. When she left, I walked to the window and watched her cross the street toward the ocean. The evening light stretched long across the water, gold blending into blue, the same colors we had both just painted. In that glow, she looked small but steady. I turned back to the canvas and traced a final stroke of yellow across the sky. The paint caught the light perfectly radiant, forgiving, alive. 1 year later, the gallery lights glowed warm against the evening air. The sign by the entrance read, Daughters and Dawns, a solo exhibition by Elaine Brooks. Seeing my name in print that way felt surreal, like stepping into a version of my life that had been waiting for me all along. The opening crowd was small but genuine neighbors, from Bayshore students from my art class, a few local journalists, and standing quietly near the entrance, Jasmine. She wore a soft linen dress, her hair loose, her smile unforced. It had been a long road for her, too. The divorce finalized months ago, the therapy ongoing. But tonight she looked lighter, free of the constant shadow she used to carry. Mom, she whispered as I approached, her eyes shining. It's beautiful, all of it. Thank you, I said, though. My voice trembled more than I expected. I wasn't sure I'd ever see this day. Eleanor, my gallery partner and dear friend, clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming to celebrate a collection born not from despair, but from transformation. Elaine's work reminds us that pain doesn't destroy color, it deepens it. Soft applause rippled through the room. I smiled, but my gaze drifted to the far wall where my final painting hung beneath a single beam of light. It was the same sunrise I'd painted in the quiet after Betrayal, now reworked into something new. The hues were bolder, the light more expansive. The title, written neatly beneath the frame, Reclaimed Light 2. Next to it hung smaller pieces, portraits of women at different stages of healing of daughters, looking toward the horizon of hands holding brushes instead of chains. Each one a story I'd once lived, now told in pigment instead of pain. As people wandered the gallery, their murmurs blended with the soft piano playing in the background. Jasmine walked slowly, studying each piece as though piecing together the parts of me she hadn't known before. When she reached Reclaimed Light 2, she stood there for a long moment. I joined her quietly. You painted us, she said finally. Yes, I replied. Every version of us. The lost one, the angry one, the one that forgave. She smiled, tears welling. It's strange. I used to think strength was about never falling apart. It's about rebuilding differently, I said, with intention, with boundaries. She took my hand, her fingers warm. You taught me that. We stood there in silence, just breathing in the color. Around us, the room hummed with quiet admiration, strangers connecting with something wordless. A journalist approached later, notebook in hand. Ms. Brooks, he asked what inspired this collection. I paused, choosing my words carefully. For most of my life, I was taught to stay polite, to keep peace, even when it cost me myself. But when silence became a cage, I found my way out through art. He nodded, jotting something down. And what would you say your work represents now? I looked toward the sunrise painting again. The colors almost seemed to breathe under the lights. Freedom, I said, but not the kind you run toward. The kind you earn by standing still and choosing not to disappear. By the end of the night, the gallery began to empty. People left with quiet smiles, some lingering to thank me, some wiping their eyes discreetly. When the last guest walked out, Jasmine helped me blow out the candles near the entry table. Outside, the moon reflected off the bay, silver and steady. The hum of laughter from the nearby cafe drifted through the air. Mom, she said softly, I think Dad would have been proud of you. I smiled, feeling the warmth of that thought without the ache it once carried. Maybe, or maybe he already is. She leaned her head against my shoulder. You know, for the first time in a long time, I'm proud of me too. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. You should be. When she left that night, I stayed behind in the empty gallery, turning off the lights one by one until only the beam over Reclaimed Light 2 remained. I stood before it, listening to the faint echo of my own breath. A year ago, I had walked into a Christmas dinner and been humiliated at a table meant for family. I had been mocked, underestimated, and nearly stripped of everything I owned. Tonight I stood surrounded by color, by my own voice made visible. They thought they could buy my silence. Instead, I painted it. As the soft music faded and the lights dimmed, I whispered a quiet thank you, not to anyone else but to myself, for finally choosing me. And if you've ever had to rebuild from betrayal, Tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters.